Welcome to a new Daily Top Askreddit video. Today's topic.
What is some dark shit going on around the world right now that the public probably doesn't know about? Saudi Arabia sentencing to death people who refuse to move out of their homes so that they can build Neom, their new mega city, and their relatives being sentenced to multiple decades of prison time just for protesting or merely posting their support to the cause on social media. This was the cover feature in Bloomberg Businessweek a couple months back. Pretty interesting. Sounds absolutely insane. I think people have been desensitized to murder in Saudi Arabia. Those fuckers will hang you for sneezing in the wrong direction. In Africa there is a very real and very extensive slave trade going on right now, to say nothing of the other probably 40 million living in bondage. It made me take more than a couple of moments to myself when I heard that there are likely more people in slavery today than there ever have been in history. More than 40 million people around the world were victims of modern slavery in 2016. Including about 25 million in forced labor, and 15 million in forced marriages. If they all lived together in a single city, it would be one of the biggest cities in the world. https 50forfreedom.org/modern-slavery/edit. People are bringing up a lot of good points. Notably, world population has increased, so it might be a lower part of the population. True. I would like to see more studies on the topic. The comparison to the city is odd. I agree. Too, it's a strange comparison, but it was what the source included. I would like to read more about it. But I saw this comment and was curious about its validity. So I decided to include a source for the above comment. I'm open to learning more about the intricacies later. But I'm drunk at trivia after exams. So, yeah, no. Maybe I'll look more into it later tonight. I used to work for a multinational company with operations in a country in West Africa. I was on a business trip there once and I noticed there were 3 employees who were excellent, hard workers, did a great job, always polite and friendly. There was a woman who was the opposite. She was surly, lazy and horrible. I asked the manager why they don't just fire her. It turned out she owned the other 3. Every month they had to give their wages to her. If the company fired her, she would leave and take her slaves with her to work somewhere else. I know it's a very real and current thing, but the sentence, she owned the other 3, is completely terrifying and such a weird concept to comprehend. It would be great to be able to save these people, to set them free. No one should be a slave. No one shall be bought or sold. Turn back, weary traveler. You have enough going on right now. Nothing in this thread is within your span of control and will only make you sad. Unless you have the money, power or a workable idea to resolve global issues, there is nothing for you here. I think we need a subreddit or news website dedicated to that kind of non-trending and barely known but actually very important news. Is there something like that out there? Anime_titties has a decent spread. Me. Hey, good one. Had a nice chuckle, opens link. WTF, you weren't kidding. Absolutely would join it. The trick is this stuff has a pretty high failure rate. I can remember thinking right at the start of January 2020, this virus thing could turn into a big deal. But I also think that probably weekly about something else that ends up being a flash in the pan. So the subreddit would likely be filled with a bunch of barely known news that also ends up being quite unimportant as well. Like virtually everything, it's easy to know what's going to be important in hindsight. 70% of the world's chocolate comes from West Africa. An estimated 1.5 million child slaves are engaged in chocolate production in Ghana and the Ivory Coast alone, not counting Nigeria and Cameroon. Always post this link for slave-free chocolate. And I'll add this one for Tony's slave-free chocolate because the mission is beyond important and the chocolate is delicious. It was the chocolate that got me aware of the issue too. https://tonyschocolonely.com/s/n/r-mission. From what I have heard from my Ghanaian, Togolese history professor, the majority of these child slaves are in the Ivory Coast. This is due to the differences in the 2 countries' farming systems. In Côte d'Ivoire, most of the cocoa farms are large-scale, plantation-esque endeavors owned largely by external bodies, and worked on by local and foreign laborers. Conversely, most cocoa farms in Ghana, and most other crops, generally speaking, are owned by families. So, in Côte d'Ivoire, it is much easier for trafficking, extortion, and slavery to exist thanks to the nature of these gigantic, externally owned farms. In Ghana, most of the farms are small enough to where the family itself is sufficient to work the land, thus making there little necessity for use of enforced labor. In Côte d'Ivoire, workers of all ages might receive some pay, but it's insufficient and much less than allotted for the work completed. Likewise, they are often promised education or housing, but in turn receive abuse and are forcibly kept on farms. This is not to say similar circumstances aren't prevalent in Ghana, but that the majority of which are in neighboring Ivory Coast. Another similar issue to mention is that of slavery in the Middle East. Largely in cities such as Dubai or Doha, where foreign workers, mostly Bangladeshi, Indian, and Pakistani, are employed to work abroad, and upon arrival, receive less income and benefits than advertised. It is barely enough, if that, to survive, nonetheless to send remittances home or to leave the country, thus leaving them entrapped in their work and in the country. A similar issue is prevalent in Qatar, where workers are quite literally worked to death to complete a stadium that will host the World Cup in 2022. Like in Côte d'Ivoire, workers receive insufficient pay and little to no benefits, and frequently live in grossly subpar conditions. I recommended the Vice documentary The Mega City Secretly Built by Slaves in regards to slavery in Dubai. Likewise, I recommended The Dark Side of Chocolate for the child slavery issues in West Africa. Literature on the latter is extensive and well documented. For both, some might argue that this is not slavery, as living conditions are often acceptable and pay is there, even if only meager. But this is still slavery nonetheless, though it does not exist in the exact form of chattel slavery that is commonly taught in Western and others education. It does not mean it isn't any less cruel or legitimate. When people are extorted, manipulated, exploited, and trafficked for labor and fiscal benefit, that is slavery. It's Cadbury and Nestle and all of their sub-brands including Kinder. These two corporations are perfectly notorious for behaving absolutely heartless when it comes to buying up African chocolate. When they're ripe, Cosao pods fall to the ground and must be picked up by hand. It's backbreaking work. They've discovered 6 to 9-year-old kids are much better at it than any adults. Problem is after about the age of 9, the kids become more and more difficult to control, and farmers have discovered the most profitable thing to do with them then is to sell them off to the warlords and terror groups operating along the borders in Uganda, Congo, Nigeria, etc. It's a real messed up sloppy bit of corruption that keeps on happening every day year after year. Right behind our backs and in front of our faces both at the same time. It's Cadbury and Nestle and all of their sub-brands including Kinder. Kinder isn't a sub-brand of Cadbury or Nestle. It's owned by Ferrero.